Okay, I have my books, I have my tea with a packet of vitamin C junk in it because I don't feel great and I cannot get sick. I don't know if this stuff works, but I sure hope it does because I feel like trash. Oh. I put it in with an actual tea bag of honey and chamomile, so it actually doesn't taste that bad. I was preparing for the worst there. I'm back with my September reading wrap up. Well, I'm back, but diminished due to the illness. But I'm gonna power through because I read 8 books last month and I think I liked all of them. There was one, 4.5 or 5 star. I haven't decided on that. And then pretty much everything else was almost equal across the board. The audiobook was a little bit less successful, but not because the story was bad. It's just, for some reason, audiobooks, I think I just need to take a break, is really the lesson I'm learning. We'll see how that goes for me because I'm also lazy sometimes. I'm going to start with my favorite book that I read last month, and then we'll work our way down, and then I'll talk about the audiobook at the end. I also have to remember to drink my tea throughout this. I will try to cut out the slurpy sounds. The first one is Watershed by Percival Everett. I read this as part of a book club. I feel like I always have a good experience with Jesse's book clubs, and this one was no exception. It was my first Everett, so I don't really have a frame of reference, but I am totally in. I get all the hype. I know that he's been around for a while, but he's a new author to me. I have James on my shelf. I'm definitely going to try to read that, hopefully by the end of the year or maybe early next year. Watershed is a part political thriller, part kind of indictment of environmental injustice. On the surface, this is about a man whose name is Robert Hawks. He is a hydrologist who finds himself drawn into this dispute over Native American water rights in Colorado. It starts in medias res, which means in the middle. I don't know any Latin, so I just know that term from English class. But it starts in medias res with Hawks trapped in a small church on a reservation, which is called the Plata Reservation, while the police and FBI have surrounded the compound. It's really intense, it's bloody, it's violent, and you're just immediately wondering, like, how did we get here? Everett rewinds us back to what ends up being this very fateful day and a fateful choice when Hawks is driving through a snowstorm to this fishing cabin that he has. He sees a very noticeably small person hitchhiking on the side of the road. And he also observes, like, this person is not dressed for the weather. He ends up pulling over, he picks up the hitchhiker, and it turns out that it is a Native American woman whose name is Louise Yellowcalf. The whole encounter feels very mysterious, kind of eerie, and although it resolves itself and it kind of ends innocuously, there's just something totally off about the whole thing. But very shortly after this, almost right after, the news comes out that 2 FBI agents have been found murdered on the reservation very nearby, or at least suspiciously close to where Hawks picked up Louise. He has his suspicions about Louise and the whole encounter, recalling just how strange the whole experience and the encounter was with her. But for some reason, he lies to the FBI investigators when they come knocking, saying, hey, you live around here. Did you see anything weird? Can you tell us anything that you might have seen on this day? He doesn't owe anything to Louise. I mean, he only met her once, but there's clearly something driving his compulsion to lie to the FBI investigators and then ultimately driving what becomes his involvement in this murder investigation. This is where this sort of braid-like structure of the book really shines. And I say a braid because there's different threads that Everett is weaving together. On one strand, you have Hawks's present-day experiences. There are also pieces of secondary materials that Everett peppers in throughout each chapter. So you'll have a paragraph and it's just telling the story, and then in italics there's a little paragraph and it's from a treaty or it's from a map or it's some testimony. Just these little references that give the story and whatever's going on in Hawks's mind at that time some context. There are also flashbacks to Hawks's own family history and this sense of growing unease that he is having with these different systems that he's been a part of. In this way, because of how Everett is structuring the book, we also kind of get to act like an investigator in the story because we're piecing together the memories, the timelines, and everything to figure out how did we end up in that church at the beginning of the story. Stylistically, it's very lean, but it's loaded. His prose is not, it's not sparse, but it's not like purple prose either. It's like Goldilocks, right? It's just right. It doesn't waste any words. The images stick with you. You get the tension driving the plot forward that something really sinister is going on here. And there's a real feeling of that kind of proverbial pill that poisoned the water, which is a kind of apt metaphor here because we are dealing with water. He is a hydrologist. He studies water. He studies the landscape. And in that way, he is a detective. Hawks is a detective because he can literally read the landscape like a detective reads clues. Through this whole framework, Everett is exploring his themes of environmental racism, the weight of history, and these uneasy alliances that form or tend to form or can form between oppressed communities. There's also the real sense of the temptation of detachment. Hawks is not the most likable guy. And he wants to stay neutral. At least there's a part of him, kind of a logical part of him that wants to stay neutral in this whole thing. But he can't. And that's where the contextual pieces of the flashbacks to the past and then the secondary materials are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Through him, we see that true neutrality is a choice. And he chooses not to stay completely neutral. He wants to find out what's going on. And that's where the weight of his own history is really informing these decisions that he's making and propelling him hopefully on the right path. So did I like it? Yes, I loved this book. The writing is really what got me. I don't know that I can say enough good things about it. The word I would describe to use this, although it's not accurate and it would undermine what's truly going on here, but Everett writes in a way that feels very effortless. He's blending this genre energy with serious political and ecological stakes. There's this moral clarity to the outrage, and this dry satirical edge keeps the prose from getting too didactic. It's really funny is what I'm trying to say. I laughed out loud so many times. It's one of those books where it's so funny you want to share it with the person because the kind of humor that Everett is using and the way that he just blends it in so seamlessly with this otherwise very serious story that he's telling is, you have to admire it, you have to respect it. Whether this is your favorite Everett or not, he is clearly working with a gift that he has. So yeah, now I'm going to make it my mission to read James and continue on with Everett. I really rarely pay attention to noise around one author or one book, or at least I try not to. Sometimes that's not always possible, but I am definitely going to make an exception here. I loved this book. The next 5 could really be in any order. I liked all of them, so it just depends on my mood which one I would rank higher. But because it's the one that I read the most recently, I'm going to start with Audition by Kitamura. This is one of the Booker Prize long-listed, now shortlisted ones that I have finished in September. This is told from the perspective of an unnamed narrator. We're led to believe, kind of a middle-aged working actress in New York City. We're also led to believe that she's contending with her current relevance. She was acclaimed back in the day. Maybe she's past her, prime, as that is considered in show business. And she's trying to recapture her former glory or whatever that feels like to her. We open right away in a conflict as our narrator is peering through a restaurant window, deciding whether she should go inside. She's meeting someone. It's unclear who it is exactly, and it's also unclear why she's so reluctant. She does go into this meeting with this young man who we learn is named Xavier, and there's something about his energy that is very disarming, and it further destabilizes our narrator when Xavier claims that she is his mother. This kicks off this very creeping ambiguity that permeates the rest of the story. Is that true? Is she his mother? Did she give up a child? Did something in her story get twisted at some point, or is this all kind of an illusion? This meeting with Xavier serves as the initial rupture, but it is the first in a series of ruptures throughout the book caused by Xavier's presence in her life. And the whole time you're in this space of ambiguity and uncertainty. And that's where I'll leave it. The main thing to know about this book is Kitamura's very focused exploration of identity and the pressures of performance versus authenticity. How do all of these explorations bump up against motherhood or the absence of motherhood? Kitamura is using theatrical metaphor throughout this book to illustrate and explore these themes and questions. It's very taut, it's very propulsive. I think around the 180 page mark, and I think this is exactly 200 pages, or at least this copy is, my heart really started pounding. It was very suspenseful, but yeah, the word that came to mind was deliberate, very controlled, almost clinical. There are no wasted words here. It's compact, but it's mighty. If you don't like ambiguity, though, and if you don't like uncertainty, then you might not like this. If you don't mind those things and you like sort of literary fiction catnip, then I think you'll enjoy this. This does feel it feels like a certain kind of prize book. When I say that, I mean a book that a prize like the Booker Prize might gravitate toward. It is doing a lot of experimentation, and I read a review that said this book is whatever you want it to be. I was very intrigued by it, and you don't know if I think it should win or anything. It's not my favorite, but I appreciated the questions that it was exploring, the experimentation, and I've said it before, I don't mind ambiguity, so that worked for me. The next one is The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller. This is another Booker shortlisted title at this point. And last month, I read 3 of the books that were ultimately shortlisted. The Land in Winter is a domestic, very detailed, slow burn with historical echoes. It takes place in post-war England during a real event that occurred called the Big Freeze, which was what it sounds like. It was a brutally cold blizzard in the UK during the winter of 1962 and 1963. So December through January, I think. It locked down a lot of the country, including the rural countryside where our story is set. When this novel is taking place, England is still feeling the ripples of the world wars as class, memory, war trauma, and the societal changes are all very present, but very quietly present, I would say, in this book. The storm acts like a lens that magnifies all of these issues that are swirling around at the time. We're with 2 married couples. First, we have Eric, who's a doctor, and his wife, Irene. They are neighbors with a younger couple, a young man named Bill and his wife Rita. There's the shared issue that everybody is facing with the looming, when the book opens, storm. Everyone is in their separate homes. We see their daily routines, the emotional undercurrents, and then all of these small little discontents and resentments. The tension of the book, aside from the storm, is built out of these small gestures, silences, and the way that the weather is making everybody feel very claustrophobic. It's not really thriller level twists, but there's this underlying sense of dread that builds throughout the story until it threatens to erupt and wreak absolute havoc, maybe worse than the storm they're actually living through. Stylistically, The Winter is basically its own character. The prose is beautiful without being flashy. This may be the most technically well-written book of the 6 shortlisted nominees. Like Everett, I will compare everything against Everett, I guess. Miller's writing is deceptively simple, though I wouldn't say that it's not quite effortless. There's clearly a lot of intention going behind every word, every sentence structure, every piece of symbolism that Miller is employing here. Theme-wise, it's about displacement, the expectation of marriage versus the reality, and the past sneaking back in. Overall, I would say it's less of a page turner. It does get more propulsive towards the end, and I believe there's some mixed feelings on the ending. I was, I'm generally going to be fine with it. If you've gotten me 3/4 of the way through a book and the ending gets a little bit different, then I'm not going to fault you for that necessarily. I will fault you if the ending stinks after the book has stank, but not in this case. This was beautiful writing. I loved how atmospheric it was. I liked that it's a character-driven fiction. I appreciated that we have something that Miller isn't trying to hide. The landscape mirrors the characters' inner lives, and if you appreciate all of those things, this will really hit the spot for you. I guess the only complaint I have is that I wish I had read it in winter. I don't know that I'm going to read it again, at least not anytime soon. So it would be a really great one to read to get a lot, I think, out of that atmosphere that Miller is creating here, if you live in a place where that occurs. Okay, 3 books. Drink my tea. It's definitely lukewarm now. We're gonna take a break from the pricey books, and I wanna talk about Lost Man's Lane by Scott Carson. I read this on my Kindle. Yes, I read it on my Kindle because I borrowed it from the library. Scott Carson is a pen name for an author who I had not heard of, but apparently he's a New York Times bestselling author. His name is Michael Kurita. I have not heard of him, but apparently he's very successful. Lost Man's Lane is a horror-tinged, coming-of-age, small-town story. It's very overtly nostalgic. It's set in the late 1990s as the year 2000 approaches, and much of the book is punctuated by real events that occurred. So there's references to, the year 2000 and when everybody went crazy. I was around the same age as our main character in this story, who is a high school kid. I was in high school when all of this was happening. So it all felt very real and relatable to me. So it was like the year 2000 and all of the drama around that. Columbine is mentioned in this story, and then 9/11 as well. So yeah, you have all of these world events that are giving context to the emotion that's going on in this story, which I very much enjoyed because I like horror, but I like horror that has an emotional grounding to it, which I think is very hard to pull off. In this case, we're in Bloomington, Indiana, seeing the life of a high school teenager whose name is Marshall Miller. He is a normal kid. There's nothing super extraordinary about him. He's just a good, regular kid. He lives with his mom, who is a single mom. We learn right away that his father is not in the picture. Everything is pretty average for him, and that becomes disrupted. The trouble really starts when Marshall gets his driver's license, and it's like as soon as he pulls out of the driveway and is driving by himself for about 5 minutes, he gets pulled over. The interaction with the cop, whose name is Maddox, is very strange. Marshall notices some irregularities about not just the encounter itself, but about the cop Maddox. There's something about him that doesn't seem to really line up, and he almost seems of a different time. Those observations that he's making, though, during this interaction where he's very nervous, he's had his driver's license for about 2 seconds, and then he's getting pulled over, and he's worried that he's going to get in trouble, all of those thoughts that you might be having when you're 15 or 16 years old and you're driving for the first time. But everything that he's experiencing takes a backseat while Maddox is chastising him, Marshall notices a young girl in the back of the cop car who is crying. Later, Marshall learns that not only is Maddox not a cop that anybody in the town is familiar with or knows, but the girl that he saw in the back of the cop car has vanished. I picked up this book after listening to an old episode, it was last year, like a Halloween episode on the New York Times Book Review podcast, and the guest on it was Joe Hill, aka Stephen King's son, and he had recommended this book, and the way that he described it was very interesting to me, obviously. I was wanting a scary book to kind of mix in with my Booker Prize reads, and this was a great one, a great, like, I don't know if I'd call it an antidote exactly, but it was a great one if you're trying to get in the mood for spooky dooky season. It was a really great mix of small town mystery trope mixed with supernatural edges. The ending got a little bit wacky. That may be expected, and like I said, I'm going to forgive a book that did a great job for most of it, and even though I was a little bit skeptical as we were nearing the end, I felt ultimately that Carson was able to pull it off because he maintained this emotional center throughout the entire story. At the same time, it felt fun. It was a good level of spooky. I don't know if anything is ever going to scare me as much as The Shining did when I read it when I was about 20, but that's a high bar. And this didn't come close to that, but there were parts where I definitely felt goosebumps. The horror isn't flashy, but I liked that it was more creeping and kind of psychological, almost folkish. It still felt satisfying because of the emotional grounding that the spookiness is playing off of. Did I say that I read 3 of the shortlisted titles in September? Because I definitely read 4. I'm not sure why I thought I only read 3, other than I can't count. The next one is The Rest of Our Lives by Ben Markovits. This tea is making me hot now, or I'm getting a fever. Who's to say? I did a little mini review of The Rest of Our Lives in my last video, which was a reaction to the shortlisted announcement, or the announcement of the shortlisted books, I guess is the better way to describe that. I'm definitely in the minority here in liking this book, or at least that's the way it feels. I'm sure I'm also in the minority in thinking that, at least from what I've read, it earned its spot on the shortlist. I say that having read Endling and not having read Sea Scraper, and I think the general opinion has been Endling or Sea Scraper should have been nominated for the shortlist instead of this book. So this is the one that people have the biggest problem with, as far as I can tell. My opinion may change, but I did prefer The Rest of Our Lives over Endling in terms of a cohesive story that's being told, not in terms of literary merit or anything like that. So just feel the need to keep issuing those disclaimers as far as Endling goes. In The Rest of Our Lives, we're with our protagonist, whose name is Tom Layward, as he's arrived at this fork-in-the-road moment. Years earlier, after learning that his wife had been unfaithful to him, Tom resolved that when their youngest child turned 18, he would leave his wife. So at the beginning of the story, we've arrived at this moment. Tom is preparing to take their youngest daughter to college for her freshman year, so now he has this choice to make. The difference between where we're at when this book starts and where he was when he made this promise to himself is that he is a different man. He is older now, obviously. He's more settled in his ways, and he's suffering some of the consequences that life will give you, or that you begin to feel as you approach or enter your midlife years. He's having trouble with his job. He's having some pretty significant health issues that he can't quite solve. And maybe I think the biggest thing here is that he's become very noticeably complacent with his life and with his circumstances. He probably doesn't want to be as complacent as he is. And when I say that, I mean he understands what his life is like, and maybe he's less inclined to disrupt it. It's sort of like the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And when we get older, we become less inclined to cause those ruptures in our lives. And that's what he's feeling, it seems, very acutely in this book. He might be relatable, but he isn't all that likable. There's a certain sense of entitlement that he has, and definitely this kind of passivity that can be off-putting. But I think his relatability shines through that. He's not so unlikable, at least he wasn't to me, that I found him infuriating. After he drops off his daughter, he doesn't just go home. He continues on in this journey, and so the book becomes basically a road trip book, and he is making all of these stops in different places, and it's like he's making pit stops in history. He is trying to remember who he was, remember that version of himself at that particular place and time, at these different locations he's going to get in touch with who he is now and then trying to make an educated decision about what his next step should be. You can't really fault a person for that, at least not in my book will I fault somebody for trying to at least gain some insight into why they have arrived at a certain moment in their life, how did they get here, and what should they do with their life next. Between all of these things, Markovits is asking the reader to sit in these doubts, sit with the discomfort of this stage of life. And while I can appreciate why that wouldn't land for everyone, I really just appreciated it from top to bottom, soup to nuts. I thought it was great. It's gentle, but it's not soft, and it doesn't rush to a resolution. It's really asking what's left when the things that you thought defined you are gone. I really think it does a great job of tapping into the mindset of people who are currently reading this book or who have been at this place in their life, or like it or not, might find themselves at this stage in their life. I really liked this one. The next one is Flesh by David Szalay. I still haven't quite figured out how I feel about this book, except that I don't know if I'm going to put it in an I liked it or an I didn't like it category. I might put it firmly, or at least temporarily, in the I appreciated this book category. I said also in my last video that I found this book to be accomplished, but extremely depressing to me. So for that reason, I'm not sure I can say that I liked it per se. Flesh follows the life of a man whose name is Istvan. We first meet Istvan when he is this shy, awkward 15-year-old living in Hungary with his mother. The book opens inside this very uneasy life and a very confusing relationship that Istvan has that upends it. Kylie Reed, who is one of the Booker Prize judges and also an author herself, she described Flesh as having the best, well, I don't know if she said the best, but certainly she had some high praise for the first chapter. And I do understand what she's talking about. I don't know if I 100% agree with her. It certainly hits the ground running. I found it to be deeply upsetting. And yet it informs the rest of the book because the consequences of that relationship are felt throughout the book. The thing that saves it for me from being too depressing that I really just didn't want to read it, at least not right now. You know, we don't need more depressing things going on. But I think what David Szalay does that saved it for me is that he does not melodramatize it. The story is told episodically as each chapter presents a snapshot of where Istvan is now and what the past is still doing to him. But we're not getting hit over the head with how that affected him, if that makes sense. Of the themes in this book, and you could probably argue that there are many, masculinity stands out as being the most obvious, with trauma maybe being a close second. Istvan rarely explodes. Despite what's happening around him, he mostly absorbs everything. He is extremely, sometimes infuriatingly passive, even more so than Tom and the rest of our lives. And much of the dialogue in this book is Istvan just, I mean, you can picture him just sort of shrugging and saying, sure, okay, sure and okay. I didn't count, I'm not going to either, how many times he says those words, but suffice it to say, it's a lot. And that can frustrate some readers. I think it did frustrate some readers. But I felt like, for me anyway, you do adapt to it and you start to understand the connotation behind each time he's saying sure or okay, and that there is actual emotion underlying what looks like his outward passivity. It's a very interesting tactic, I think, to illustrate what modern manhood looks like when the world keeps pushing you around and telling you to suppress all your emotions. As for trauma, Szalay is quietly interested in how these early violations in Istvan's life kind of calcify into these patterns that he develops of passivity and outward detachment. it's a revelation of Istvan and his life and how he changes, but I would say it's a revelation that exists more in the margins rather than directly in the center. You might call this a failing upwards story, and you have to wait and see whether that implodes or whether Istvan himself implodes at some point. Overall, I appreciated Flesh. I can certainly see this being a contender for the Booker Prize this year because the topic of masculinity has been so discussed, I feel like, recently. And that could just be me. Again, like the algorithm is warping my viewpoint. I just do feel that this has been quite a timely, trendy topic, and Flesh deals with that topic more so than any of the other books, even the ones that are also tackling that subject matter, like The Rest of Our Lives and Flashlight, and I'm sure a few others on the list that I either haven't read yet or I'm just not thinking about. But Flesh is very good. I think if you haven't read it yet, you can wait for the paperback though, unless you want to, get in the Booker Prize discussion. The next one is not a dislike or like because it's a classic. It is a classic by George Orwell, and it is Animal Farm. And who am I to say whether, this is a good book or not? It's a classic for a reason. I first read it when I was in 8th grade, which is kind of wild to think about, but, I'm old now. The reason I say that it's wild is because this is a sharp little allegory where a group of farm animals overthrow their human owner to run the farm themselves. The animals are anthropomorphized. They all have different levels of intelligence, or so we're told, and they organize and operate like this little society with politicians, but Orwell is still hinting at the animal nature, which really underscores the satirical edge that he's able to master in this very short novella. I think it's maybe 100 pages max. In this story, the pigs are the ones who are in charge, and they capture the leadership on the platform of equality and freedom. But as the pigs are gradually seizing more and more power, the revolution that they started curdles to tyranny, and the other animals on the farm suffer the effects. This is a fable, a classic fable, of how idealistic movements can morph into oppressive regimes and tyranny. I hated the book when I read it when I was 13, but I didn't understand it. Some of the editions have this preface that Orwell wrote. He wrote the book in 1945, I think, and he wrote it as a critique of Stalinist Russia. But the warnings about power and corruption are obviously still relevant talking points. The preface that he wrote didn't make it into every single edition. And in the edition that I have, it does have the preface, which is titled Freedom of the Press. Regardless of, where you fall, and I'm not offering opinions on that. I'm just kind of marveling at the fact that this feels like an old book, but it's kind of not. I'm sure that you can mine much, much more from this book, but I'll leave it there for now and tell you to read Animal Farm. And maybe while you're at it, you could also pick up 1984, because at least when I got my copies, they came in a little set. I don't know if they're supposed to be companion pieces, but Orwell wrote both of them. The last one is the only audiobook that I finished in September, and it was Standard Deviation by Katherine Heiny. I cannot remember everything about this book, so bear with me. Again, this is the tea's making me hiccup now. We are following Graham. He is a 30-something-year-old guy living with his wife, Audra, and their son, Matthew. They're all living in New York City together. And Matthew is neurodivergent. We also learn that Audra is actually Graham's second wife, his much younger second wife. His first wife, whose name was Elsbeth, not Elizabeth, it's Elspeth. The history is that Audra, his second wife, really couldn't be more different from Elspeth, where Elspeth is very tight, she's very controlled, she's almost cold. Audra is very bubbly, she says whatever she's thinking, and she's sort of more effortlessly charming. She comes across as being almost unrealistic, Audra anyway, but I liked her. I thought she was hilarious. This is another passive man that I've read, which was not my intention. I don't know how all of these books are creeping their way into my reading, but I found Graham to be so infuriating, more so than any of the other passive, annoying men that I've talked about today. But he is very observant. He's very judgmental. He's very entitled. I almost DNF'd this book because he became so irritating to me, but I stuck with it because I think what the story is telling as a meditation on how marriage can feel like a constant series of negotiations, some with higher stakes than others, and this question of at what point do you compromise yourself into the marriage. Those are interesting topics to me, but at the same time, there were some specific plot lines that were interesting only to become infuriating, and then they were just kind of like it felt forgotten. So your mileage might vary on this, and to me, it was fine because, again, I was just listening to it on audio. Nothing felt super high stakes, and I could work my way through Graham being the most irritating person. I was probably most interested, though, in how Audra and Graham came together, these seemingly very different people. You kind of wonder, well, you don't after spending any time at all with Graham, but you wonder how they've made their marriage last sometimes, and they come together very well when it comes to Matthew, their neurodivergent son. There's this whole origami plot involved, and I was really charmed by it. I thought it was cute. So yeah, the specifics are not super important. It's not the most plot intense book. This is another character book, but not as accomplished, obviously, as some of the other ones that I'm talking about. It's a great audiobook to have on in the background. The narration was good. It doesn't demand rapt attention to it. It doesn't require that kind of level of engagement. So it's totally fine, and I didn't hate it, but I'm sure I will forget everything about it in about 2 weeks. Those are all the books that I read in September. It was a good reading month. I have no complaints. I'm currently reading Nosferatu by Joe Hill. I've actually never read anything by Joe Hill, so I'm doing a hybrid. I'm listening to it, and then I'm going to start reading it on my Kindle because I have to go to Texas, and so I think I'll take that book with me, and then I'm also reading The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny by Karen Desai right now. I'm about maybe 80 pages in, so I'm not very far into that one. It's a chunky one. And then I will still want to finish the long list. I think I will try to read Sea Scraper if I can get through The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny. It's impossible for me not to mess that up. I am also going to be reading something else for Jesse's book club. I can't remember what it is, but I'll stick it up here. I think that's it in terms of my specific intentions for the month of October. So we'll just see how the month goes. I have to go to Texas. Obviously, I have work to do. And I am running a half marathon on the 18th. So I'm almost done. That might be why I'm sick. I have never been good at fueling my long distance races. When I go to Texas, I think I might try to do a video there because I'm going to be going through my childhood stuff. The reason is depressing and I don't want to talk about it, but I have a lot of books, so I wonder if it might be fun for me to kind of balance the depressing and make it a little bit more fun to do a video on the formative books from my childhood. I don't know if that would be interesting or fun, let me know. But otherwise, I have not ruled out jumping on the National Book Award bandwagon, but maybe only the shortlist. It just is a matter of whether I have time. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit like. If you want to see more from me, and if you're not already, please subscribe. I appreciate every single person who takes the time to watch a video, and even more if you do me the kindness of hitting the subscribe or like button. It genuinely is very, very seen on my part and felt in terms of connecting with people who enjoy the same types of stories and content that I do. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.